Good evening, everyone in the East Coast. Probably good afternoon in the West Coast, and for everyone that is watching us online around the world. So we are here. My name is Daniel Santos from the Spirit Society of Baltimore. We have here Adrian Alvarez from the Allan Kardec Spirit Society of Maryland. Abigail Francisco from the Spirit Society of North Beach, Maryland. And we are representing the Spirit Societies of Maryland. And also we have another Spirit Society that are not here, but we represent her, Cynthia Fabret from the Germantown Spirit Society, and I'm sure she's watching. And this is an initiative from the Spirit Society of Maryland, in at least every month brings someone to present a interesting topic, of course, in the area of Spiritism. And today we are here with Andreia Marshall from Florida, a good friend of ours. And last Monday, we have her husband, Marcelo Neto, that gave a beautiful talk. And today is going to be the second part of this couple endeavor and presentation. Welcome, Andreia.
Thank you.
So to initiate our virtual presentation today, we're going to invite Adrian to do our initial prayer and then present Andreia Marshall.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you to everybody who's watching us. Welcome. Let us elevate our thoughts to our Creator, giving thanks for the many blessings that come our way. Despite this pandemic, we're still able to maintain connected with each other and with the higher spirits and mentors who guide us, reminding us always that we are never alone, that they're always with us, encouraging us to stay strong in our faith, to stay connected with their good thoughts and wishes. We thank our mentors for the opportunities that this pandemic has brought us to be able to spread our message of love to a greater audience. And so with so much gladness and with tremendous satisfaction for the things that this beautiful life has given us, we say, thank you, God, and so be it. Friends, we have the tremendous honor of welcoming our good friend, Andreia Marshall Neto. She's very modest. She didn't want a long introduction, but there are a few things that I'd like to highlight. First, that she is the Director of Operations for the Conscious Living Spiritist Group in North Miami, as Daniel mentioned. She's an active member of the Spiritist movement here in the United States and in Florida. But I think the thing that I want to highlight most is that she's been very instrumental in helping to disseminate the Spiritist doctrine in English. Among the many hats she wears, she is the managing director for Leal Publisher, which is the publisher here in the United States that translates the work of Divaldo Franco, who is an eminent and prolific writer and medium in Brazil, to English. And so it's because of her work and the work of Leal Publisher that we are able to enjoy such wonderful books of the Spiritist canon in English. So I'd like to, without further ado, extend a very warm welcome to our friend Andreia. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Aidan. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here this evening with you guys and for such a warm, welcoming message.
Thank you, Andreia. So now the floor is yours. So
thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, you guys. Once again, when we were invited, we were very grateful and, of course, always honored when a serious group such as this one thinks so much of us to consider that we actually have something to contribute as far as the Spiritist teachings is concerned. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here this evening with you guys. The topic that we suggested when Sonia extended the invitation was one that we actually put together at the very beginning of the pandemic here in the state of Florida, which started happening in the middle of March. And we remembered about the Spiritist magazine or the Spiritist Review, of 1867 and 1868, which had contained very important teachings related to an epidemic that had hit the Mauritius Islands back then, and the communication between Spiritists who resided in those islands, with Allan Kardec, and also the publications of such letters, and also spirit communications that came about because of this very tough situation that was happening at Mauritius Islands. Mauritius Islands, for those of you who do not know, is an old island that used to belong to France, but no longer. If you guys want to look it up, it's actually a very beautiful place. And you can actually look at the historic facts as well after we present the topic today that we found. Before we go on, we are all very much aware when we start studying about Spiritism, even more today, about something that is contained in the book Genesis, Miracles and Predictions According to Spiritism, specifically chapter 18, in which Allan Kardec brings us some very profound teaching related to the signs of time and the moment of transition that our world is under. We've seen messages from Duval Pereira Franco that talks about that, about this very special moment that all of us incarnated at this time are living under, as we transition from a world of trials and expiations to a world of regeneration. And we also even have the book Planetary Transition, which is distributed by Leal Publisher. And I like to talk about the team effort for this publisher to have all of these books come about and be available, be readily available, so that it can actually assist us in our journey as incarnated spirits here on this planet, reincarnated spirits here on this planet. So he brings us a couple of aspects that is very important for us to consider before we dive into the communications that Allan Kardec received from the residents at Mauritius Islands, as well as the spirit communications that came to support and encourage not only those who were actually in touch with Allan Kardec, those who had an interest in the Spiritist doctrine back then, but also us. It seems as if nothing was left to chance for Spiritists who would come at a later time, and here is where we are today. So here's the first paragraph that we wanted to show. The time, however, does not entail a partial change as far as the change from a world of trials and expiation to one of regeneration. It's a renewal that is not limited to a certain area, people, or race. We're talking about the change. We're talking about this universal movement that is going to take place, that is taking place in the sense of moral progress. And not only that, he completes it with saying, nowadays it is no longer that entrails of the planet that are being stirred up, but those of humankind. Great. What does that have to do with the study today? Well, pretty much everything. When we consider what is happening today in our world, we see a pandemic that is not hitting just a specific location in the world. It is a global pandemic. It is something that has come to shake up the very core of our hearts. It has nothing to do with just shaking up the core of the planet as it changes its axis, as it goes through its physiological changes, calamities of earthquakes, of this or that. No, it's talking about something that is here to shake us up, and why not even say move the tectonic plates of our own hearts, as we are also become even more aware of certain changes that needs to take place, not only individually, but also collectively. And as we dive into the Spiritist literature, we find even more that a moment of transition, a change that takes place, invites men and women of all races, of all cultures, of all religions, regardless of what they may be, to take a look within, to start analyzing where we have come so far. Intellectually, that's great. We've come very far, but morally, where do we stand today? And that's going to be a very personal question for each one of us who may be watching right now, who may be watching later on, who may feel even inclined to go into the temple of one's own soul in the silence through meditation or prayer, to consider what we have been doing so far for the betterment of our planet, for the betterment of ourselves. Pretty much, the letters that we're going to bring today, parts of it, of course, we can't bring everything in detail because of our time, is actually going to offer us exactly that, a moment for us to reflect on ourselves as spiritists or not, as human beings who are being invited to consider what's happening today. Interestingly enough, when the pandemic hit, I do partake in this website. I follow the news called Charter for Compassion, which was created by Karen Armstrong. She's a pretty amazing lady. She has released many amazing books, and we invite you to also look that up if you're inclined to do so. But it's a place where people from different backgrounds, religions, can actually get there and find information that is quite relevant. And one of the things that we saw many philosophies hitting on was the aspect that the pandemic was here as a calling for us to become aware, even more spiritually aware about what is happening in the world today. We are going to find then that if anything actually strikes an interest today for you guys, we hope that you will feel inclined to not only look up the Spiritist codification books to find even more supporting material for what we are going to bring here, but perhaps even an interest for you to look up these magazines, these reviews that have been translated now, if I'm not mistaken, up until the year of 1864, available at the United States Spiritist Council website, and also Kardecpedia in many different languages for download and study. And we're going to dive in and see here that somehow history repeats itself. And not only does it repeat itself, it comes about bringing some information that we can utilize that is actually going to offer us some support as we keep going through the pandemic. And although this study was put together in March, we see its relevance even today. In a new month, we are already here in August. It has been a few months. All of us here in Miami, all of us here, actually, the majority of the Spiritist centers in Miami and in Florida are still closed. They're having their meetings online because of the growing number and the concern related to the pandemic. And we find how relevant it still is for us to see about the teachings that were brought here to us. So here it is, the epidemic on Mauritius Islands. The first type of communication and letters that were brought were in the magazine of 1866. It was something that hit the island and killed over 60,000 people. If you look up its historic fact, you're going to find that it had to do with a fever that was actually hitting on the doors of many of its residents, and they were actually suffering a lot from the physical conditions that came about from this illness. And contrary to what we have today, it wasn't easy to target exactly what was happening back then. We also have to remember that Allan Kardec posted the letters in 1867 because at the end of 1866, when this plague, if we want to call it this way, this pandemic hit the island, it took quite a while for communication to actually reach Leon, where Allan Kardec was, and for him to have an idea of what was happening. Different than today, we are here connected via StreamYard, this amazing tool that we have for disseminating Spiritism, but also we have WhatsApp, we have text messages, we have emails. We know what is happening at the other side of the world because of the advancements of technology. Back then, that was not available. So we are inviting once again, just to kind of reiterate here, a reflection on the lessons contained in the Spiritist letters, in the letters of the Spiritist Review, and the spirit communication that came about on that as well. So enough of that, enough of the presentation. July of 1867 is when Allan Kardec releases presenting us what was happening at the island, and stating that there was a Mr. T, a somnambulistic medium. If you do not know what somnambulistic medium is, we invite you to read the medium's book, item 172 on chapter 14. Mr. T, a few months prior, had stated through this somnambulistic state that the Maurice Islands was being devastated by a terrible epidemic. And this letter, dated May 6th, was shared with the readers when the reader actually started to tell Allan Kardec what was happening. It is interesting what we are going to find now, and I'm going to actually look to the side because it's a huge text. And basically what the reader, what the Spiritist resident was stating amid many of the things that he wrote to Allan Kardec, he or she, we don't know the name of the writer of the letter, he stated that he was also affected by the pandemic and that he or she was in his fourth round of the illness. So the illness would take place very slowly. It would affect the person, a fever would take place, it would go really high, and all of a sudden it would go down again, and then it would pick it up again and go down back again. And this is what happened until eventually the person either got better or they discarnated from it, which is why we see the huge number of discarnate in the Mauritius Islands because of this epidemic at there. And then they talked about how they had access to this medicine called a quinine. Quinine was this medicine that was available for a lot of the people at the island. It was actually something that wasn't healing the illness, but it was actually allowing the residents to stay alive while they were enduring the fever and its effects on the physical body. And then the reader goes to say something to Allan Kardec that was mind-boggling, because he stated that if the ups and downs of the fever continue taking place, it was very probable that they actually would discarnate. And the discarnation actually wasn't going to be such a big deal. And then they said something amazing. They said, if this does happen, it's very likely that if I have the merit, I will be able to partake in your meetings at the Parisian Spiritist Society in spirit, as a spirit. And then I will feel even closer to you than I do today at the Mauritius Islands. In a second, and without feeling any sort of distress, I will be able to be at your meetings. And to tell you the truth, I am way too much of a spiritist to even fear considering discarnating from this epidemic. Honestly, to me, when I was reading this communication, this letter that was so beautifully written to Allan Kardec, I started considering my own attitude in the beginning of the pandemic, and also the attitude, the feeling, the way many of my Spiritist friends, colleagues, acquaintances were reacting to the pandemic. And we find here the very first teaching as we reflect on what they had just told Allan Kardec. This type of serenity that had to do with coming to the sense, coming to the reality that perhaps this person would discarnate. But the serenity that came with it, with the understanding based on the Spiritist teachings that would only really find a place in the heart in understanding, yes, I am an immortal spirit, and yes, this is all transitory, this is all temporary, and this is not real life. And that's okay if tonight or tomorrow I leave the physical vessel and find myself, hopefully, in good conditions in the spirit world. Then they said something to Allan Kardec. While you pray for me, I do request that you also pray for those unhappy souls who, in a way, even though they know that people are suffering because of this pandemic, they actually cause and add even more suffering. It's a lack of humanity. So what was happening at that time was that when people came to know that quinine was actually very good, it used to be 1 franc. I think that was the value of it. It was a very inexpensive type of medicine that was available for the people at that time. What they started doing is raising the cost of it. raising it so much to the point where those who were not very lucky to be able to get their hands on, whether because they were financially challenged or because there was just no way because people were buying it in bulk, this reader realized that there were a lot of people discarnating when they shouldn't be, where not only those who were producing it in mass, but also those who were buying it in bulk were being so selfish to the point where people were dying because of that. So he asks Allan Kardec and the readers of the review to pray for those unhappy souls, for they already realize the kind of pain and suffering that comes about from a guilty conscience. A conscience, somebody who is aware of the ills that they actually added to as far as suffering on behalf of the others is concerned. When somebody reads a book like Heaven and Hell, and this is another hit here for you if you're watching, to read again. If you don't want to go through the very first part of the book, fine, go to the second part of the book, starting with the passage, and try to find out what it is that causes pain and suffering to the spirit when the person who discarnated finds themselves in the spirit world. What is it that causes the suffering of the spirit? Oftentimes it has to do with their own conscience, because they're faced basically with themselves when they get to the spirit plane, and they realize that which they could do to alleviate someone's suffering and they did not. They get in touch with what they could do to better themselves in the time that they wasted. There are so many factors and there are so many teachings contained in that book that we should actually reread it once again to remind ourselves on, and it serves almost as a manual for us. But this specific writer to Allan Kardec had in mind the kind of suffering that they would endure later on for having contributing to the pain and suffering at Mauritius Islands at that time, which goes to show even more the state of the good Spiritists as contained in the Gospel according to Spiritism. So they go on to say, our small group has been pretty much isolated for the last 3 months. All of the members have been more or less affected by this epidemic, but thankfully, none of us have discarnated at this time. They go on to say that perhaps being in the spirit had to do with the fact that it was actually strengthening them, strengthening their physical body, not to discarnate. And when we read works from Andreia Lewis and Joanna de Angelis and even Allan Kardec, and understanding what actually prayer, reflection, meditation can actually do to the physical body, change of conduct, change of thinking processes, changing of the sentiments and feelings that make up who we are, we end up understanding the effect of healthy effect that it has on our physical body. And on the contrary, if it's a negative one, we learn that we are actually able to fall ill because of our own conduct, thoughts, feelings, and everything that actually comes with that. Allan Kardec was kind enough to remind us that one of the true aspect and characteristic of this person, when they say a person needs to be truly a spiritist, to face death with such a naturality about them, such a calmness about us. He talks to us about the aspect of faith, something that is very important to have, something that is very important to actually develop if we don't have the type of faith, the type of unshakable faith that he talks about, which is the only kind that can stand face to face with reason in all human aspects. So when the Spiritist is able to say with such naturality, with such calmness, talking about death, talking about dying, where does it come from? We have a body of knowledge that started out with a book based on questions and answers. Right there and then we see the ability to reason, to think about. It's not something that is imposed onto us. We know about things, which is why we are able to, with reason, have faith, consider it in a different aspect. This is why we work so hard on trying to tell the members at our Spiritist Center that we should be reading, that we should be reading, and reading good Spiritist books, books that have a solid principles brought on by the benevolent spirits and Allan Kardec. Everything else that came later with the support material from André Luiz and Emmanuel, Joana de Angelis, Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, and so many other great benefactors. Pretty soon we're going to have Vitor Hugo also released, and a new translation that is actually just about to come out. We say this because we feel that books empower people to feel that they can stand on their own 2 feet and with reason understand what they're going through. If it's an illness, if it's a terminal illness, what is it that gives someone hope? I remember looking at my father a few years back. He's already discarnated, but he was battling stage 4 cancer. And I remember that whenever I talked to him about life in the spirit realm, about the Spiritist teachings, there was a certain glow in his eyes, because he felt that faith that came from the reason that we feel today. We have all of this material to back up information so that we are no longer being led blindly. The veil has been lifted, and we are able to see things with more clarity. This is why when we see faith at times of a global pandemic, and always, we are going to find the Spirit Joseph in the Gospel according to Spiritism telling us that faith is that divine inspiration from God. It awakens all of the noble instincts that leads us towards the good. It is that foundation of regeneration. And then he goes on to finish the paragraph in stating that sincere faith is alluring and contagious. It communicates itself to those who did not have it, and even to those who do not have any desire to have it at all. It is the type of contamination that we should wish for. At the time of pandemic, more and more people should be having access to hearts and minds that have already been filled with those type of faith, faithful, so that they too can feel the type of serenity, the type of tranquility. Yes, sometimes we get anxious, we get concerned, we get worried about things, but then we calm down and we take a step back and we consider all of the things that we have been exposed to, and we breathe. And this is the type of attitude that we should have towards others at the time of pandemic. It is not the time to raise any type of desperation. It is not the time to promote and disseminate messages and ideas that are conflicting on social media. It is not the time to do that. It is the time to promote the human being, to promote an idea that is positive, that is going to have an effect on other people who are even contemplating suicide. The times are very drastic right now. It is not something to be taken lightly. We find a lot of people desperate because of financial crisis, things that they're going through right now, and everything needs to be taken into consideration. Not be Pollyanna-like, be optimistic, and being optimistic and with reason, showing a different side of things so that others can start envisioning life in a different way as well. On a letter that Allan Kardec received and posted in the Spiritist Review of 1868, we find here somebody who offered us even deeper reflections. So the person had basically been affected by the pandemic, much like the previous reader whose letter was posted in 1867. But different than that, this person said that they were actually dividing their time between working and also making sure that they got better from the illness that they were affected by. They were also having the fever that was actually discarnating so many men and women in the island. So they actually asked Allan Kardec to forgive them for the lack of communication, but then they said something very interesting. And here is what this person had to say. Convinced of the fact that I may in fact discarnate, I utilize what time I have left trying to liberate myself from all the earthly vanities and moral vices that still hold me back, with hopes that, should I discarnate, I may arrive at the spirit world better than I was upon reincarnating in this lifetime. I didn't even know what to think when I read that. And in seeking the very best part of the letters that Allan Kardec, to me, that was the one that really stuck out. First and foremost, I dare ask you guys, maybe you guys did this, but at the time of the pandemic, how many of us, after we were getting ready for it, getting supplies that we needed, getting the soap and the disinfectants. By the way, here in Florida, we're still out of many of the supplies that were actually selling quite fast in March and April. But how many of us literally stopped to consider that maybe this was the time to start utilizing the time we have left to try to liberate ourselves from the earthly vanities and moral vices that still holds us back, with hopes of, should we discarnate from COVID-19, arriving in the spirit plane better than when we left it, when we left to reincarnate here at the time of transition. I don't know if you guys did that. I can tell you with all honesty that I did not. I had not until I had read this letter contained in November of 1868 of the Spiritist Review. It was mind-blowing to see the type of attitude that, yes, we should be having right now and always. When we incarnated, when we reincarnated, when we read the book Missionaries of the Light, we perhaps knew the time of, or the period of the earth in which we were reincarnating into, time of transition. Perhaps we even begged for the opportunity to be here and be part of the historic aspect of transitioning from a world of trials and expiations into one of regeneration. Because now we understand what Jesus meant by inheriting the earth, we perhaps felt that maybe, just maybe, if I was able to get a seat into this place of transition on planet Earth, perhaps if I worked hard enough, if I did everything that I could within my limits, I could be somebody who would inherit the earth, meaning who would be okay to be invited back into a world of regeneration, equipped, dressed accordingly for. Today we find that dressed accordingly for, as we read in some of the Gospels, has to do with the condition of our perispirit. As we continue on the progress, we evolve. There is a process of purification of our perispirit, the condition necessary according to the planet in which we will in the future reincarnate into. So we start working at it. We actually reincarnated with hopes that this is exactly what we would do. We would be mindful of certain conduct that we carry. There is no need to do a regression of memory to find out who I was or what I did. All I need to do is take a look in the mirror, is take a look at myself, and I will find exactly what needs to be worked on. I will find out exactly the areas in which I need to clean up, to polish a little bit better. I am fully aware of the things that I need to work on. And if anybody feel that they are not, that there is still a lot of confusion about the things that need to be done, this is why we have the psychological series books of Joana de Angelis, many of them already translated, and we have professionals in the area, the transpersonal psychology, psychiatrists sometimes that need to actually appear in our life and contribute so that we can be also mentally health fit to be able to continue on our journey. So this letter here, in my opinion, was pretty amazing, that they actually were able to leave that there for us to start considering, am I utilizing the time I have left to try to liberate myself from the earthly vanities, those passions, the vices that still holds me back? Am I doing that? Because it's interesting to see that we were all invited to go back home. A lot of people are out and about already, but it's interesting to see how many fraternal assistant phone calls we had with people who just did not know how to deal with themselves and their own families at the time of the pandemic. Many people contemplating divorces. Parents who were not sure how to speak to their kids. how to look at them, because they were together now 24/7, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to feel, not knowing how to think. And this is also part of our spiritual progress. The time that we have with our family members, with those who live with us, and even if we live alone, we have ourselves to contemplate at, to look at, to reflect upon. So it's very interesting what this reader actually had to say and write to Allan Kardec, leaving for us a very inestimable type of gift that offers us a moment to reflect upon how the Spiritist in 2020 is dealing with the pandemic. The Spirit Clélie du Plantier did offer a spirit communication for Allan Kardec, a communication for Allan Kardec, which was actually quite interesting as well. As we have stated before, during a crisis as unusual as it may seem, nothing has been left to chance. These crises are a consequence of the general movement occurring in both the physical and moral world. And then this is part of the communication. Health is the result of the balance of all natural forces. When a pandemic sets in, it can only be due to the rupture of this balance. And this is where all of us really need to pay attention right now. A lot of people are blaming countries, individuals, leaders for what is happening globally. Instead of blame, one of the things that the Spirit perhaps is inviting us to do is consider the level of involvement, or better yet, the type of contribution that we actually offered in creating a rupture of the balance of all natural forces, as Clélie du Plantier is talking about here. Could we also be responsible for what is happening globally? It's something we should be considering, because it's not set in one place only. It's not an epidemic, it's a pandemic. It's a global situation that is happening, and all of us are being affected somehow. So perhaps it is time to own up a little bit about our duties and obligations, what we have or have not done, what we could do to bring back the balance of all natural forces. And what does this mean exactly? So let's just take a look, because this would be an entire other public talk that we could have here, and offer a study really to be done with people together contributing from different books. But this is what Joana de Angeli has to say in the book Glorious Days. Here's what she said. She said, the cultivation of hatred, jealousy, envy, ire, and other asserted anesthetics of the spirit produces psychical viruses and vibrios that attack the body of the host and that of the person who, unguarded, inspired the production of such devastating waves, which the mind produces according to its moral constitution. So if there is a rupture of the balance of the natural forces, and we start considering, how could I have contributed to this? Or better yet, how can I be part of the solution? Here is what we see, a hint from Joana de Angeli in this amazing book, considering what type of cultivation of love, compassion, tolerance, everything that is the opposite of what she's bringing here could actually do, not only to our physical constitution, but the very psychic atmosphere that we live in, whether it's in our household, whether it's in the city, whether it's actually, because it's a collective movement, the kind of positive impact it could have from a spiritual perspective. And this is just food for thought here for us to consider and think about even more when our study is concluded. This is why Clélie du Plantier considered saying, Mauritius Island will be reborn. The new year will set in, and with it, we will see the end of the pandemic. Not due to any medication, but because the pandemic will have reached its objective. The calamity will have reached its objective. Calamities, according to the benevolent spirits in the Spirits book, are here to allow for humanity to progress more quickly. This is an answer to question 737 of the Spirits book, in which the benevolent spirits tell Allan Kardec that in order for us to appreciate the result, we need to see the end of things, to be able to appreciate the results and understand even more what they mean by calamities allow humanity to progress more quickly. And they continue, you only judge such things from your own personal point of view. These hardships are often necessary in order to make things arrive at a better order more quickly, and to accomplish it in a few years, what would otherwise require many centuries. Perhaps this is what led Clélie de Poitiers to say, Mauritius Island will be reborn. Planet Earth will be reborn. When we're talking about COVID-19, not because of any medication that is to come about, but because this pandemic will have reached its objective. For us Spiritists, it's easy to understand this, but perhaps a conversation with those who have not yet embraced our philosophy, our understanding of a Spiritist doctrine, we can tell them that there is an objective for all of this. There is something that is awaiting us that is going to be even better than what we consider it to be. This is what led the spirit Bezerra de Menezes to communicate through Divaldo Franco, and I'm not sure if this message is yet in English, perhaps we can get them if it's not, to talk about the fact that the time at hand is so important for us right now, Spiritists, that it's no longer possible for us to go back. There is no going back. There is only going forward. We can opt to stay stationed, paralyzed in fear, not ready for it, or we can utilize all of this information, becoming empowered, find out what we can do to arrive at the objective sooner than we are, and proactively work for it, and also assist others in the same type of mindset, in the same type of movement. Calamities, Dr. Demure was also a spirit who communicated. Dr. Demure was actually Allan Kardec's doctor, a personal friend. He stated, calamities are instruments used by the great surgeon of the universe to remove from the world destined to march forward the elements that are filled with gangrene, that cause disorders and are incompatible with its new state. So although a lot of people felt that it's a punishment, that perhaps we are all in time out at home for being bad, maybe so, maybe we are in time out, but we see that it's not a punishment. There is a very profound, a very deep objective to all of this, and although we may not see the end yet, we can certainly try to appreciate the outcome, the results that are to come out of that. Divaldo Franco stated that after the pandemic, we are going to find a world of regeneration. Of course, it's not going to be at that moment, but it means that we are closer to it. We are walking towards it steadily, without wasting time. We don't have any time to waste, basically. And benevolent spirits wish for us to arrive at this place quicker, better, with more awareness and understanding of what is happening. And this is why it is very important for us to remember that there is a spiritual protection and support that has been taking place ever since the pandemic, even before the pandemic set in. I don't know if you guys read Planetary Transition and the care and the preps that went about in the backstage, spiritually speaking, when they were already aware that the tsunami was going to hit the island and so many people were going to discarnate. There were actually a group of spirits who were called upon to assist in the rescue, the spiritual rescue of recently discarnated people at that time. So I wanted to remind you guys of something that we read in the book No Solar, and you're going to say, this has nothing to do, I don't know where Andreia is going with this, but it does. It's just to show that everything is under control and that the benevolent spirits are with us at every moment, whether we are in a moment of pandemic or not. During World War II, this is where we found on chapter 41, A Call to Struggle, something happened that actually announced there the assistance that was to come about from the highest spheres, not solar, but the highest spheres that had to do with the fact that there were a lot of people who were going to discarnate during World War II. I don't know if you guys remember part of this book. I'm going to show here, but before we do that, I just wanted to say what happened. Divaldo Franco, on a public talk that he had, if I'm not mistaken, it was either May or June, somebody had asked him during the live, how were the spirits of people who had discarnated due to COVID-19 being received in the spirit plane? They actually asked Divaldo Franco that question. And he offered a very beautiful explanation, but then he said something that was really cool. He said that in September, he was told that in September of 2019, there was something very similar to what happened that was narrated in No Solar that took place. There was a call, a chim here, a clarion call that was heard. This wasn't supposed to come about yet. Sorry, Danielle. A clarion call that happened in September in the spirit plane, announcing the crisis that was to hit our planet due to COVID. And not only that, this clarion call was summoning the leaders responsible for every country on planet Earth, who actually had their own missionaries that worked under the guidance of Christ to assist us at this moment of transition, at this moment of pandemic, at this moment of a calamity that is calling us, that is shaking us to the very core. It's so beautiful to see, because he stated that this happened in September, because many of the cases that were actually coming about didn't start happening in December. It actually started happening before, end of September, November, because the illnesses, the pandemic wasn't yet made known to what was actually coming to be with its devastating type of contamination that was going to actually increase. And the increase that we saw was actually what we saw was in December. But the reason why I'm saying this is because much like during World War II, where thousands of people were dying by the masses, we saw the type of care and concern from the spirit plane that we find now during a pandemic. And here is what I wanted to share. Now you can put the screen, Danielle, in which André Luiz stated that during the very first days of September 1939, coincidence, right? It was also September of 1939, No Solar suffered the impact that affected many spirit colonies connected with American civilization. It was the beginning of the Second World War. I, André Luiz, was in the chambers of rectification with Tobias and Narcisa when an unforgettable clarion call was heard for over a quarter of an hour. We were all awestruck. That is summoning from the higher planes to service in the assistance of the earth, Narcisa explained. When the clarion call of alarm sounds in the name of the Lord, we must silence all noise so that it appeals may be engraved in our hearts. Why did I decide to bring this? First and foremost, just to show not only this clarion call that was actually summoning from the higher planes the assistance of benevolent spirits to help the people at the time of World War II, but the very type of thing happened during a pandemic, which shows that we have not been alone, that we are not alone. And now that we have this information, now that we remember that when a clarion calls of an alarm sounds in such a way in the name of Jesus, like they said, we must silence all of the noise so that we can actually allow its appeals to be engraved in our hearts, silencing all of the noise that is actually not contributing positively at a time of pandemic. So if it's something that we find that we need assistance on, if our heart is filled with despair, with desperation, with discouragement, with depression, know that there are people willing to talk, to embrace. I'm sure that I would be not the only person right now telling you, hey, you could talk to me. Danielle, Abigail, Lily, Sonia, Adrian, all of these people I know would be willing to offer a helping hand so that we can hear the appeals that are coming from up high. We must remember that as spiritists, fully conscious and aware, we also know that we can contribute being their assistants here on earth. So we've been assisted by the Spiritist teachings. Why not become assistants so that we are also proactively working towards the betterment of our planet, towards lifting a brother or a sister who has fallen? How many times have we needed that type of assistance? So if today I feel good, if I am standing up, if I feel strengthened, why not share that same type of attitude towards someone that I know may be struggling during the pandemic? Silencing the noises that are not contributing, so that as spiritual antennas, we may pick up where we can actually be of assistance at this moment of pandemic. This is why Joana de Angelis, in the book Jesus in Our Days, states that it is urgent. The present desperately needs urgently to bring back an uncrucified Jesus, a companion, a therapist offering emergency assistance in order to stop it from going over the edge. Humanity, the present time, people, how many people are on the edge of falling over the abyss of suicide, of desperation, falling into alcoholism, drug abuse, and any other sorts of escape to try to get away from what is happening? He is the one that we need to be mindful of and remind people of. I just finished a conversation prior to joining you guys. There are moments where it's really hard. And I reminded this person the same thing that I remind myself. When there is nowhere to go, there is one place to go. I will give you my example, and I will offer you this idea, which you can use as you see fit. Sometimes in the midst of a despair, I sit on the edge of my bed, and so that I do not go over the edge, I envision him beside me, sitting there. Psychotherapist, a best friend, someone who loves me and you so much that there was a promise that he would stay with us until the very end of time, that he knew us before we even became. It is someone who knows us, our frailties, but also knows about our qualities. It is a call that is so profound. It is a communication that is so intimate between us and Christ that at that moment, it's as if all of the good qualities that are within us, whether they are still dormant or whether they are already awakened, it actually comes up and makes us feel whole again. This is the type of relationship that we need to have with Christ. It is no longer the type of pure spirit that is so far away that we can't reach. We heard at a public talk here, Divaldo saying that the connection is so deep. We think about him and there is connection. Of course, he is the good shepherd and he watches out for each one of us specifically. It is only clear and filled with reason, the faith that we have in our hearts, that at a time of pandemic, we wouldn't be left alone and we wouldn't be left to chance. So our hope today is that the study that we brought, although summarized, may actually bring forth some type of reflection about our own conduct during the pandemic, and that we should strengthen the ties even more with the one who loves us so much and allowed us to be invited to partake in reincarnating at a time of transition, our governor of our world. We're talking about our dear Master Jesus. So let's bring him back, desperately bringing him back, not only to our own lives, but perhaps those who have already forgotten about him or even do not know about his existence. With that, I thank you guys, and I ask Danielle to come back and take over the study today.
Andreia, my dear friend, excellent presentation, a lot of reflection, food for thoughts, you touching a lot of topics that is very important, especially in this moment that we are living. But I'll bring here Andreia and our dear Abigail. So we have a lot of people here in the chat. You can see the comments and questions. We're gonna go to the questions and comment, but first I would like to open for Adrian and Abigail if they have any comment or question to Andreia. A lot of information here, isn't it, Adrian?
That was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Just a minute. Okay, go ahead.
No, thank you so much. Very inspiring, and especially that final quote and from Joana de Angelis and the meditation on Jesus's continued presence in our life. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Abigail, do you have any comment?
No, Andreia, sweetheart, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you so very much. It was wonderful, your lecture, a lot for us to reflect. And even with all these situations happening in the world, you were able to bring to me peace and joy with your lecture and a wake-up call for so many things. You know, we needed to not just to study more, but there is so many things that we still needed to do to give you hands, you know, and be united. And like you said, one thing is so important that you said there, then I would like to emphasize, it is the need for us to silence, you know, for us to take our time for meditation, for visualization. We need to visualize so many good things and putting good energy on the universe. So thank you, sweetheart, and God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail.
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you, Adrian. And I think the word here is serenity. I hear that word a lot in your presentation, because we are living a moment that, as you said in the beginning, Andreia, history repeats itself. But the beauty of the repetition of history is that we have learned at least the information that the Spirit and the Spiritist teaching brings to us. You know, this consoling message that we are not abandoned, we are not alone. That's beautiful. And that's the time that we need to repeat this, not only to ourselves, but to our community and those that feel that they are forgotten by the Creator. So let us go to our comments here. There is a lot of people participating. Everybody from our Spirit Center here in Maryland, they are here. And they are making comment, and they are making, and they also, there is some question as well. Let us go to the questions. So, for example, there is a question here by Yasko. As usual, Yasko is our, questioning person from our societies. So Yasko is asking here, was mostly the population of this island affected by the epidemics, or the continental countries were too? If mostly the island was targeted, what was the reason? Poverty? Sanitation? So do you have any further information?
It was malaria. It was malaria. And interestingly enough, the way today Mauritius Islands has not had hardly any casualties with COVID-19, which goes to show how the advancements in science and technology actually today has prepped that island to have the type of care and that would actually assist in not allowing it to propagate in the way that it did. But we have to remember the conditions also in that time different from today. So it was actually also only at that island, Yasko. It wasn't anywhere else I know of. At that time, it was only in Mauritius Islands.
Yes, thank you. And you have another question from the Spirit Society of North Beach. Question, please give us a practical ways to protect ourselves from being contaminated by the effects of this pandemic. Just make a comment here, because I already have the practical way to avoid the virus by wash our hands, use a mask. But the question here is more profound. And so the person asked for you to comment on that.
It's a very good question. And actually, if you consider also the spiritual pressure that is happening, how we see that both planes, the physical and the spiritual, actually, they're together all the time. There's no defining line. Oh, here's the spiritual, here's the physical one. We feel the pressure also, the agitation that is taking place from a spiritual perspective. And a lot of us are feeling it even more than other people. So some of the practical way definitely would be resorting to prayer, resorting to mindful reading. Books also assist us in changing our frequency, if you will, so that what we are actually capturing is coming from a higher sphere and not a lower one. That's one of the other ways. Another way to not be contaminated is avoiding, for example, in social media, where we see there are a lot of people contributing with negativity and conflicting ideas, it's natural that we become angered. Some people get really angry. They get into the wave of hatred and intolerance. One way to not be contaminated by that is simply choosing what we actually wish to be exposed to. So I just recently started following a good news movement page on Instagram and Facebook. It's great. Yes, I do become educated with the news and what is happening. And of course, sometimes for the Spiritist, because this is a Spiritist presentation, we resort to the common sense, what we should be doing right now, which Danielle Santos just said. But from a Spiritist perspective, one of the ways is reading a good book, listening to good music, resorting to prayer, resorting to nature. How many of us have had the time to simply go out, sit out into the sun, to contemplate nature, to appreciate the simple aspect of having a sight, being able to see, being able to hear, being able to walk, being able to be alive regardless of the type of hardships that we are having. That's one of the ways, because unfortunately, we are not going to be away from what is happening. This is a world of trials and expiations. We shouldn't expect less, that there will be trials, there will be tribulations, but how we actually react to it is actually going to assist us even more on how affected we are at this moment of transition, at this moment of pandemic. Hopefully I answered that. And I don't know if you guys want to contribute, please. Adrian, Abigail, Danielle, please contribute.
Oh, no, you said it. And one thing, besides everything said, that people still needed to realize, doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter if you're 10, 20, 30, we need to wear masks. We need all that hygienic that you mentioned, not just the physical, but the mental. But one thing I would like to encourage, again, everybody, the need of the masks. We need to wear.
And we also, just to kind of add there, I just wanted to say, yes, I'm a big bookworm, and Spiritist books are, our lives. But here's an idea. When I read something that is very profound and one of the most horrible times of our existence as humanity, read the book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That is a beautiful book that puts things into perspective from someone who is in the middle of a concentration camp, right? So this is something else that we should be considering. Silencing negativity is also important, not in a way where I'm going to make little of what Adrian is feeling, but for instance, somebody who just left a message for you 3-5 minutes WhatsApp message complaining that everything hurts, that nothing is good, that they can't work, instead of making little of it or rolling our eyes, which, sometimes we want to do. No, let's try to show another facet of what's happening. Today, 4 times, I used the example of Divaldo Pereira Franco. At 93 years old, having just endured a 5-hour-long surgery, he's feeling the impact of a nerve that is damaged by a herniated disc. He can't feel his left leg. So I said, all of us are going to be going through different types of things. And that's actually good for the soul. We are growing. We are becoming stronger. Try to analyze what you can do at the moment that is positive for you. These are some of the things that we can do also to not be contaminated by it, with compassion and love, not with impatience and intolerance, or sometimes you just want to smack someone because they can't see what's right in front of them. But everybody's their own reality, its own universe, and how they feel and think. And sometimes I'm going to have a very bad day. And I hope that somebody is going to not be affected by my negativity, but in reality may point out things that I'm forgetting to see, or that I'm just not seeing because I am clouded by negative feelings, the pressure from the spirit plane as well. That's something that we also have to remember.
Thank you. Let's continue with our questions here.
Yeah.
The next question is by Kirsten. She's asking, some countries and states are doing better with controlling the spread of this pandemic. Is this a reflection of their moral state, or just a consequence of listen to science? It's a very complex question.
Wow. Can I say, Chris, you and I are broken up for good now. To be honest, I can't answer that question. Perhaps it's because they're listening to science. Perhaps it has to do with the quality of its own residents and how they're putting forth the ability to follow the golden rule of doing unto others as we wish them to do unto us. Meaning, when I go out in public, I don't know if I do have COVID-19, but I do wear a mask because I don't want to be contributing to the contamination. I don't want to be contributing to the increase of it. I don't want to have the weight on my shoulders to know that if somebody died from COVID, it was because of my negligence or it was because of my irresponsibility, right? So I do believe that a lot of people are being part of the solution because of this level of awareness that they have reached already. This is something that we can read. I know Kirsten is a big fan of Joana de Angelis' books. Joana talks about how some people are basically walking somnambulists. They are living, but they're not. They are still asleep to what needs to be done, to the reality of their duties, of their obligations, of their responsibilities. So perhaps it's a combination of all that, Kirsten.
I think something that you said, if I can jump in here,
yeah, go ahead.
Very compelling was this notion that the pandemic in Mauritius ended when the time was right, when the lesson was learned, when they endured what they had to endure. And I was just listening. There's a podcast. The Washington Post has a podcast that I listen to sometimes. I was talking about how the pandemic has affected other countries and kind of bemoaning the fact that we as a society here in the United States are still in a very sort of lockdown mode when other countries are already starting to open up and to move way beyond where we are right now. And, I think what you said is absolutely right. Maybe the reason, maybe it could have something to do with the moral development of other countries, but I think it's for me, it's not helpful to think about whether we're less developed morally than other countries or not. It's just that there's still things that we need to learn from this pandemic, and it hasn't run its course because we can still take advantage. There's still lessons that we as a society can learn from this pandemic that we still haven't learned and that are needed for us to grow collectively as a country. And I think that was something that you showed me very clearly through your presentation.
Yes, very. Thank you, Adrian. Mm-hmm.
Oh, Andrea, we have more like probably 1 or 2 questions. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, so this one is more related to what you have presented. You ask again, are the current pandemic close to reach its objective, as says Clarine de Platier? Pardon my French.
Do you want the You want the true answer, or do you want what I think and feel?
Whatever you can give. I mean, like,
Honestly,
you can bring.
I don't
Yes.
feel so. I don't think it's close to reaching its objective, to be quite honest. When we take a look at how I don't feel that it is Yasko. I would like it to be, of course. This is my own personal opinion based on what I see happening currently in our world. Without talking, I don't want to talk about politics or anything, but what I do know is that if individually we are able to have an impact on other people, perhaps the way that I am acting during a pandemic may have an impact on Adrian, who may have an impact on Abigail, who may have an impact on Daniel, and collectively we start acting accordingly, perhaps we will reach the objective sooner, which is what we should be concerned with right now. It's how we are really going through the pandemic, because we might actually succumb to it and discarnate, right? So did we do everything that we were supposed to do, right? Up until now. I have friends who have been hit with the pandemic who are feeling rebellious about it. And it's hard to tell somebody that, it's a blessed opportunity to be under when you're impacted by such an illness. But here's where we see how Spiritism really is that saving, floating device that is thrown when the sea is rough. Because right now we are in the condition of a very rough seas. And Spiritism is that floating device that is allowing us to have rest while we are trying to stay alive and not drown under all the negativity and things that is happening. So individually, we can have an impact so that collectively we will reach it sooner.
Thank you, Andreia. Because of time, we still have a lot of comment here. We're not gonna have time to go over each comment, but I invite you, Andreia, later to read the comment, and there is some other questions. But we are approaching the end of our virtual but presential here or online presentation. So let me put one comment here that came from Chris Anastasian, that is from Joanna, and it's from the book Happy Life. I'm trying to find here this one here. So for us to meditate on that, because I think right now a lot of people is out there losing loved ones. And this message from Happy Life by Joanna Judge says that death is but a change of address. Everything undergoes transformation. Therefore, as you live, know that death can reach you at any moment. I think this is an invitation for all of us here to at least think, not in a morbid way about death, but see as a process of life. This is something that is part of our evolution. So we came to this planet, we are a little baby one day, teenager, and then we're gonna reach a time that we need to go back to our, primary home, that is the spiritual plane. So Andreia, thank you so much for, this beautiful presentation. I hope it's a presentation that we need to share with others that are not here and listen again, because I'll take my time to listen back to your presentation. You put a lot of information here, and so if Adrian and Abigail wanted to just say something before we pass the word for you to leave with your message. After that, Abigail is going to do our final prayer.
The only thing I want to say is thank you so much, Andreia, for taking the time to be with us, to share what you learned, and to inspire us tonight.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you.
Yes, Andreia, like I said earlier, thank you, sweetheart, again. It is so good to learn, and now we can pass to others, and then we hope the others keep passing. So thank you again, and I hope to see you soon, and I hope to be able to give a big hug soon.
Me too. Thank you.
Great. Your final word for us, Andreia, before Abigail.
Just thank you so much for inviting me, and I wish everyone a lot of peace, a lot of serenity, a lot of patience also during this time. It's going to pass. And although we may not know when or how, we know that we can do our part. Just remember to bring back Jesus, like Joanna said, and crucified companion, the psychotherapist that we need to assist us during these hard times. God bless all of you guys who are listening right now.
Thank you, Andrea. Abigail, would you please help us to close?
Yes, so just one more thing before the prayer. I would like to thank all the friends that took the time today to be here together with us for one more learning. And I invite you all now then to relax your minds and together elevate our thoughts to our dear Father. And as we finish up this lecture, would you like to express, dear Father, our gratitude to you, to our Master Jesus, and to our mentors? Help us understand what you have learned here today. Help us, please, to be more kind, more tolerant, more compassionate, and more charitable. Please, Father, fill our hearts with your love, that we may be able to pour it out to others, and help us to live in harmony with each other, that together we can help make a difference in this world. Help us better ourselves. And please comfort the heart of the ones that are suffering during this difficult time, not just the pandemic, but in all the catastrophes. And with our heart feeling all that love and joy, we ask permission to close our meeting. So be it.
Thank you, everyone. May you all have a good night. Bye.
Good night.